Indiana Jones and Han Solo have been compared by fans for a long time because of some of their clear similarities. One of the main ones being that both characters are played by Harrison Ford, but there's one major sin on Solo's part that proves that they're extremely different. Of course, both characters are well loved for each of their roles and have made Ford a major name in Hollywood because of how well he played them. Here's the scoop on what sets them apart. From the beginning of both films, the Star Wars and Indiana Jones franchises have gone hand in hand. In fact, what many people may not know is that the archaeologist, who the latter films are focused on, was famously conceived on the Hawaiian beach, while George Lucas hid from what he expected would be a terrible opening for Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope. The two franchises swapped positions from year to year, dominating the box office for 4 whole years. Between all that, they had another major thing in common: Harrison Ford. While he plays Han Solo in the Star Wars universe, he also landed the role of the protagonist in Indiana Jones. In fact, multiple Star Wars movies are stuffed with Indiana Jones Easter eggs and vice versa. Some people even think the whole story with Indiana Jones could be Han Solo's fever dream while he's frozen in the carbonite. Others think Jones could be Han's clone. Still, others think Han Solo may have become Indiana Jones after he arrived in the spaceship in Crystal Skull. And then there's the theory that states that Han Solo is one of Indiana Jones' descendants. Some others have gone even further, positing that maybe Han Solo never aged because of the Holy Grail from his time as Indiana Jones. That being said, it's no surprise that fans see similarities between the two characters. Let's briefly talk about some aspects of the two characters that make them so similar. Just the fact that both Solo and Jones are freebooters that don't play by the rules, but make their own rules as they embark on various exciting adventures is something that has been intriguing fans ever since the movies came out. These similarities made it seem like both characters played by Ford might actually be the same, just set in different time periods and settings, as we mentioned before. We'll get into that in more detail later, but let's get into what proves that this theory couldn't be farther from the truth. There's a new detail in a recent Star Wars comic that we're going to touch on for reference here. In Star Wars Revelations number 1, Darth Vader comes to learn of an object that has the potential to cause mass destruction. We're talking destruction of galactic proportions here. What's the object, you ask? It's the mind of the rebellious droid, Ajax Sigma. Vader sees visions of the far-reaching chaos it can cause, including taking control of the fan-favorite character, Dr. Aphra, and potentially turning her into a Sith with the Spark Eternal. Considering the abilities this item possesses, it's of the utmost importance that it's under constant surveillance to ensure that the galaxy is safe. But what ends up happening is that Sigma's mind winds up in none other than Han Solo's hands, and you'll never guess what he does with it. He buries it with zero security, zero guards, and not even Chewbacca monitoring it. He simply believes that the safest bet to keep an object like that safe is to bury it, like a common pirate would treat his treasure. It's no surprise that the mind is eventually found, all thanks to Solo's recklessness. Now, fans of Indiana Jones know that he'd never let something like that happen. We're going to bring up one of his most iconic quotes here: "Ancient items belong in a museum to stay out of the hands of those who might use them for the wrong reasons." This was shown in movies like Raiders of the Lost Ark, where he goes as far as risking his life and nearly being flattened by a boulder, all to preserve a golden idol before he's ultimately surrounded and forced to give it up. From all that, we see that Jones at least has some concern about the fragility of human life and is dedicated to ensuring that it goes on. Han, on the other hand, since this Han in Revelations is the character who cruised through the galaxy before A New Hope, he's still a pirate looking out for only himself. And that's what makes him nothing like Indiana Jones. He tends to think more about himself than the greater good. at least before he joins forces with Luke and Leia to save the rebellion. But there's more to even that story. Let's transport you back to the Battle of Yavin. Han makes an appearance and shoots down a TIE fighter on Luke's tail. Luke destroys the Death Star, and after the battle, both Luke and Han are awarded medals of bravery for their heroic efforts. Fans think the former was well-deserved, but what about the latter? Luke Skywalker was clearly the actual star of the show, forced to go through with the mission with Han's help, who was way more interested in getting his payout from the previous mission he had helped with. Fortunately for the Rebel Alliance, though, Solo's conscience makes him swoop in at the very last minute. Sure, if he hadn't struck down that one TIE fighter, Luke wouldn't have been able to go through with the major part of the mission. That being said, Solo's overall contribution to the whole fight was pretty minor, considering how he returned to the battle with a lot of hesitation. When he finally did come to the decision, several Rebel pilots were already dead, and most of the enemy threat had already been eliminated. He didn't even have to face the Death Star's long, narrow trench run, where the Imperials let loose repeated cannon fire against their opponents. Moving on, all Solo did was arrive at the last minute, destroy one single TIE fighter, and fly off before the enemy base exploded. If he had stuck around the entire battle, a lot more lives could have been saved because a pilot with his skills would have been invaluable at the time. If he'd been there earlier, maybe the victory would have come with less sacrifice. Yes, he came back, and yes, he saved Luke's life, which in turn led to the Rebels' victory. But he just got lucky to come back when he did. One might even argue that he just sat around watching the battle from a distance, then decided to intervene when it was convenient for him. So does that make it fair for him to be compared to the likes of Indiana Jones? Maybe not, but that hasn't stopped the two franchises from giving hidden connections to one another. Up next, taking place during Marvel's Vader Down storyline, Star Wars just revealed a new connection between the two characters. Both characters are the creation of George Lucas, and both are played by Harrison Ford. Also, both are roguish heroes in search of fortune and glory, ultimately doing the right thing. Despite their differences when it comes to morals, they do have their similarities. In Vader Down, the rebellion managed to destroy Darth Vader's TIE Advanced, forcing him to crash onto planet Vrogus Voss. The story is set between the events that transpire in A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, and depicts the rebellion's best shot at destroying the Dark Lord of the Sith, since he was alone and without the might of the Empire backing him up. But the Dark Lord eventually proves that he never really needed the Empire to be a force to be reckoned with. Excuse the pun. During the search for Vader, Han Solo and Chewbacca are also looking for Luke Skywalker after he rams his X-Wing into Vader's TIE, forcing them both to crash. They eventually find Luke in the clutches of Dr. Aphra, who was working for Vader at the time. Han and the rogue archaeologist engage in blaster fire combat, hitting nearby nests of wasp worms that end up crawling over both of them. The creatures look a lot like snakes. And if you've watched Indiana Jones, you know how much he hates snakes. As Han Solo and Aphra run toward each other in fear and disgust, there's a line you may recall from Indy's classic line: "Not wasp worms, anything but wasp worms." Ringing any bells? Up next, snakes. Why'd it have to be snakes? Indy says the line in Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's literally the one thing he's most afraid of. He hunts not carries a whip, but snakes are where he draws the line. After the wasp worms call back to Indy's line, Han and Aphra crash into each other, knocking each other unconscious out of their mutual fear of wasp worms. It's a pretty interesting connection between Han Solo and Indiana Jones. It's also a new tie between Dr. Aphra, who was created specifically with Jones in mind, serving as a big inspiration for her character. It's always always a good time when writers add references to other characters and properties, especially when it's someone like Indiana Jones who shares a commonality with Han Solo. It's not exactly a very overt crossover comic between the two franchises, but these subtle connection points are pretty cool for hardcore fans anyway. Finally, that's not where the similarities between the two shows ends. The two franchises have found a way to acknowledge each other in their respective films, time and again. Star Wars had a little more difficulty doing it, considering its story took place long before Indiana Jones was even born. But Indiana Jones wasn't bound by the same factors. There are a bunch of Easter eggs in both films. Like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, you can spot familiar call signs printed on the side of a plane that reference Star Wars. We're talking about the OB-CPO call letters on that plane featured in the opening sequence of the movie. In the same movie, you can even spot hieroglyphics featuring R2-D2 and C-3PO carved out together on the walls of the Well of Souls. We won't get into all of them, but look it up and you'll find several more hidden things like that in the movies that have led people to even more firmly believe that the two franchises may exist in the same universe. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think Indy and Solo are similar? What do you think about both franchises being a part of the same universe? Does it seem too far-fetched to be true? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.